Welcome to the Out Agenda, coming to you on archive.kpfk.org. I'm Rita Gonzalez. Well, this week is our segment on Radio QGLLU. So on that note, I'm going to let them take it away.
Welcome to the Radio QGLLU podcast, the show that takes a deep dive into what the queer, gay, and lesbian Latine community is talking about. In today's episode, we're talking about the founding of the Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos archives. We'll discuss why the organizers, Maria Garcia and Elias Naranjo, were interested in documenting the GLLU story.
I'm Lidia Otero.
And I'm Rita Gonzalez.
And I'm Mario J. Novoa.
Okay, this is Rita. My first question is to Maria. What struck with you about the history of GLLU that you were interested in creating an archive?
So what really stuck with me about GLLU is one of the premieres that I went to, that if you look GLLU up online, you can't find any information about it. And I thought that was really unfair, especially after seeing the documentary and seeing all of the great work that GLLU has done. It should be able to be found online. And I work with youth. And so just knowing the history of your culture and knowing that queer Latina people existed before you and that you're not the first is very reassuring. I took one of our youth actually to see the premieres, and they were very starstruck, and it was really great to be able to see them have the same impact that GLLU had on me when I first saw the premiere. So that was one of the main reasons, to really put GLLU on the map and to also be able to share the history with young people.
So this is Lidia. I'm going to ask Elías the same question. What made you interested in creating an archive?
I think similar, like Maria had mentioned, I am what you call perhaps a millennial and maybe Generation Z. So I like to call it a zillennial. So I like to Google everything and try to find things online. And when I can't find things online, I think there's a barrier where I'm like, okay, there's this really incredible story. How do I remember it and share it when it's not on the internet? And I was thinking of those two, and I thought, well, I guess that's something that people like Maria and I have to kind of create. I have that mindset, if you don't see it, you should create it and make it a reality. And that was my feeling after I saw GLLU, and then after I saw that nothing was really online. There was a few articles here and there, but it wasn't as in-depth as what the documentary gave us. So to have those images accessible by the click of my phone, I thought that would be really, really incredible, because I felt such an impact when I saw the story, and I wanted to share it with more people. So that's kind of what made me interested in creating an archive as well.
I'm going to ask Maria a question. This is Lidia again. Can you share a little bit about your background and perhaps where you came from?
I'll start with my parents. My parents are both from Mexico. My mom is from Jalisco, Guadalajara, and my dad is from Colima, and they immigrated here when they were in their late teens and early 20s. So they actually met at King Taco, which is a very famous taco chain here in LA. My dad was a cook and my mom worked in the cash register, and so they ended up meeting there. I have an older brother who is 7 years older than me, and they had him, and then I came along and I was born in Montebello. I lived here in LA for the first few years of my life, but then my family moved to Riverside, to a little town called Paris, not Paris, France. I usually never say Paris because everybody's always like France. And I was like, do I look like I'm French? But so I grew up in Paris, but I have a lot of family here in LA, specifically East LA. And so a lot of my life, I grew up coming back and forth. And I was always very sad that I didn't get the opportunity to grow up in LA. I have a lot of cousins here, and I felt like I was robbed of living my real LA life. And so once I graduated high school, I was looking first to go to the East Coast because I wanted something new. But I ended up going to UCLA. So it made the most sense to go there. And it was also far enough from family where I felt like I could be my own self and have my own space, but also close enough to visit family. And it was in LA. And so once I graduated from UCLA, I didn't want to go back to Riverside. And so I am living here in East LA now. A little bit more about my queer journey. I always knew that I was queer since I was very little, since I was in kindergarten or first grade. I just recently talked to my mom about this, and she was like, you didn't know until you were in middle school. And I was like, how are you going to tell me when I knew? But that was sort of when she started noticing some of these things, but I always knew that like I had the same feelings towards men that I had towards women. And so I never really felt comfortable coming out fully as my queer identity because I was raised Catholic. There was always these undertones of like being gay not being okay. And so I never felt really safe. I knew my parents wouldn't kick me out or anything like that, but I didn't feel comfortable. So I came to UCLA, and once I got here, I actually found the minor LGBT studies, which I didn't know was a minor. And so through there, I was able to meet a lot of really great professors who taught me about different being queer in LA. And I learned about Jean Cordova, and I learned so much about like my history that I didn't know existed before. And it was very reassuring and it felt like I was really able to come into my own once I was in college. And so that's a little bit about my history. Right now, I work at a nonprofit called Rainbow Labs, and I work with queer youth, even though I also technically am considered a queer youth. It's been very fulfilling. I never really thought that I would work with queer youth before, but as I mentioned before, that's one of the reasons I am really passionate about like sharing our history and knowing that we existed and will continue to exist. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and my history.
Thanks. And Rita, what was your nickname for Jean Cordova?
The iguana. And she called me Richie Rich. Just want to mention that I love King Taco, and I do have family in Paris, and it wasn't in the French one.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should have a little equal opportunity here. Elías, can you share with us a little bit of your background and perhaps where you came from?
So my background, I'm first generation Peruvian and Mexican. My mom and her whole side are from Peru. My whole dad's side's from Mexico. So I feel that not from here, not from there type of feeling, very much so. But I grew up in Orange County, so my experience feels so different than a lot of the folks I meet in LA, because I grew up in a very small town in South Orange County, which is primarily white, and it's also primarily conservative and I guess middle to upper class, which my family wasn't really. So I feel like I had a lot of internalized racism and transphobia and homophobia to undo for a really long time, because that's just where I grew up. I was like one of the only brown people in my friend group for a long, long time. So, and I didn't even know any queer people or even knew what being trans was for a really long time, probably until like my 20s, until I started like searching for more queer folk. And it's still very small in Orange County. Like it's not as like LA has an amazing queer community. In Orange County, it's still very, very small, and it's still very white, cis centered. So it was a community I didn't really feel like I could be welcomed or felt comfortable in. And I'm living in LA now, but I feel like I still have a lot of roots in Orange County. My family lives there. I have a lot of friends from there. But I guess that's just I was just thinking about that because I feel like I didn't have a lot of Latinx friends growing up. And if I did, they were more similar to me. Like we were really assimilated, and we had to like undo a lot of like internalized racism to be like okay with like, oh yeah, I am like half Mexican, or I am Mexican, you know? And I think that's a little bit different of my experience of like feeling that up until like my 20s of really trying to like undo that. And now I like only like surround myself with like queer folks of color, trans folks of color. Like that really, really changed for me when I moved from Lake Forest to Garden Grove, which Garden Grove is a more primarily it's a big Asian community, but there's a lot of Latinx folks. So I felt like that was a huge shift. And then I just started being in spaces where it was only like trans, queer people of color, which like blew my mind because the only people I knew that were queer were like white folks. So I guess that's a little bit of my background. I feel like I feel like that's why GLLU is so important to hear about, because I didn't even know you could be like queer and Latinx and like all these things at the same time. Like I think mentioned in like the story that someone mentioned that, oh, I only saw only white people were queer. And like, I thought that too. So I don't know. I think that really spoke to me, and thinking about like the background that I have. I also didn't finish college. I'm trying to do that, and I still landed myself in really great spots, which is really incredible. I work for a nonprofit that works with trans youth and youth affected by HIV and AIDS. And we run summer camps for them. I'm currently here at a camp right now, and it's in Big Bear. And I like that Lydia told me that Big Bear has a lot of queer history, which I love because I didn't even connect the two, that GLU was having these retreats in Big Bear, and now we're having these trans youth camps in Big Bear, which is so huge because we're still one of the only like organizations that run trans camps out here in California and like the whole United States. And I love that it's here in Big Bear with so much history. So that felt really special to me. I know it's not the same camps, but it's still really incredible because it's in that area. So it feels nice to be a part of that history that's happening right now. But I think that is a little tidbit about me and my background and where I come from.
This is Lydia, and I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about the website. Like, what does it take to create a digital archive?
It's definitely interesting. We have a lot of content from Gregorio, who collated a lot of content from different GLU members for the documentary. And so we are able to have a file of all of these great photos and posters and pamphlets of different GLU archives. But some of the trouble that me and Elias are having are identifying the exact year, the exact people, giving context to a lot of these photos when we put them on the website, because some of the files are just sort of dropped in there for the documentary. And some of the files also we can't open, which aren't transferable. So creating an online archive is very meticulous. I'm sure creating an in-person one is also very meticulous, but when it comes online, you don't always have the photos right in front of you. You don't always have the context right in front of you. And then also trying to navigate the website and figure out what we can put and what we can't put, how to customize everything, making sure the colors and the proportions are right, talking about accessibility. We've talked about wanting to do it in Spanish as well, so it can be accessible to folks who speak Spanish, talking about adding captions to the photos for folks who might not be able to see the website but have those machines that read it to them. And so there's a lot of different things that go into the website that we can't fully incorporate right now just because it's me and Elias working on it, but we have all of these things in mind, and we want to make sure that we make it as accessible as we can for all of the queer community. And Elias, if you want to add anything else as well.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of power to do it and it takes a lot of folks to do it, because Maria and I are just, two people that we work full-time jobs, but we're really, really passionate about it. And so this is kind of like a side thing, which for me keeps me really motivated. And it's something I'm so passionate about that I love doing it. But when I think of archival, I think of folks that are like dedicating their whole lives to doing archival work and are doing it from like an academic standpoint. That's what I think of when I think of archival. I think of an academic place doing archival work. I know there's some places that aren't academic based that are doing it, but a lot of them are coming from these spaces because they have the funding and they have the people to do it. And I think there's been a shift in like archival work from what I've seen, just because of social media and just because of having like media available to you. Like I've been influenced and inspired by like a lot of Instagrams that are archival based, that are just people doing it because they want to share queer history. They want to share like history in like East LA. And these aren't people coming from like academic spaces. These are people coming because they really want to share that. And I feel similarly to that. And I like that aspect. Not that it's not okay to come in from an academic space, which I think it's great because UCLA has great archival stuff. And I think it's really incredible, but it's nice to see that shift in like the archival space going from like academic to like a more personal view and coming from passion of these folks that just want to share. Like just on Instagram, like there's a trans mask studies, there's like queer history studies, archival, and it's like stuff that I would have never seen if I didn't like see it on my Instagram. So I think it's really unique, but I think it does take a lot of work, and that's why I see why folks like dedicate like their whole lives to doing this work.
And this is Mario again. I wanted to ask, usually we think about archives like the One Archives. They have a facility, they have a building, they're hosted by USC. And we think of of a building that holds records and photos, and you're now taking this archive into the digital space. Can you talk about what the difference and what is the difference going to be like to put all these photos and the publications from Unidad, the official Unidad publications? Can you talk about what the difference might look like? And that could be for Maria.
I think one of the main differences is the fact that it will be a lot more folks will just be able to see it. For things like the One Archives and the UCLA archives, where a lot of GLU members generously donated their archives, me and Elías are going to have to go in person to physically see them and take pictures of them in order to scan them and upload them to the website. But once they're on the website, now everybody will be able to see them from wherever they're at in the country, outside of the country, and folks will be able to see it from their own homes, which is really radical because a lot of the times our history is hidden from us, and it's on purpose. They don't want us to know about our history. It's not taught in schools. It's not taught in educational settings. It's being fought to be taught against in educational settings. And so for young people to be able to go online and find this archive without needing to have a teacher teach it to them, it's empowering, and it gives people their voices back.
And I wanted to ask the same question to Elías. What is it that this archive will look like for people? You mentioned social media and Instagram. What other digital spaces might this archive be located?
Yeah, so we have a website that is dedicated to the GLU archives, which is really great and will have like much more detailed things than the Instagram, because Instagram only gives you so much. You can only put a caption for so long, and some of the text on either the flyers that we have or the images that we want to add, like we can only share so much. So I feel like the Instagram is kind of like a preview, and then the website is like what really has all the context, all the information. Having that be able to be seen, like the text in Spanish and English, these long texts, that is our idea of having the website. And then like social media being like kind of like stepping stone to the website, like seeing the Instagram and being like, oh, let me go click on the website because it's like actually fully blown and you can actually see what is going on in the image, and then you can see more context and what's written on it.
So when people, let's say a GLU member or somebody from the public would like to give you a photo or a poster, some publication that was connected to GLU, do they give you that physical material and then you scan it, and then once it's scanned and uploaded to the website, where does the physical material go?
So I honestly haven't really thought about having any physical copies, just because I think that would be harder. They would either have to come with us to scan it so we could give it back to them, or we would maybe have to mail it back if they couldn't, but it would be a lot easier if they could scan it themselves and send it to us. If somebody is local from LA and maybe would want to meet up with me and Elías, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure Elías would be happy to as well, but they would just need to be with us while we scan so that we can give them whatever it is that they want back. If they want it back, of course, I'm sure they will.
But if they can't scan it, like they just aren't tech savvy like that, I wouldn't mind if if they sent a physical copy of it either. Like that is for me that's doable as well. Like we could scan it ourselves and then figure out how to give it back to them. But digital ones would be much easier, or if you're in LA. But if you're not anymore, then a physical copy being mailed would be fine.
And this question is for Rita and Lydia, since they were both in GLU.
Mm-hmm.
Where do the archives exist for GLU? USC, UCLA, any other research facility? Is there an official GLU physical archive?
I don't think there's a central, this is Lydia, there's no centralized archives. I know some GLU folks donated some of the materials to UCLA too. I'm donating my archive, because I have a sizable amount of stuff, to the LA Central Library and Special Collections. Luis Jacinto, who has a number of photographs, is donating has already donated his photographs and to the LA Central Library. And Irene Martinez and Laura Duran, who have a big collection. In fact, I think it's the biggest collection of the Latina Lesbian East LA support group and of Lesbianas Unidas are donating their materials to the LA Central Library. I also know that Roland is donating some of his materials to One Institute and to Cal State LA because they have a Central American Studies there that's interested in some of his materials. So I don't think there's going to be a central archive. I do think for you, Maria and Elias, that it does raise a problem. What you're trying to do is start an online archive, and that once you start taking physical items, then you have to decide what you're going to do with them. And the worst thing that can happen is that you have to store them and or keep them, and that comes with a lot of responsibility because you have to. So I think that in the future, maybe thinking through where you want to donate these materials that people donate to you, or having a list and suggestions where they can take these materials. But I think, of course, scanning them and digitalizing them is the first priority because we want people to see them and to have them and to be able to use them in the future.
You may have already answered this, but do you feel that this information is important now? Is it relevant to young people to see these stories, and why?
So it definitely is very relevant to young people to see these stories and to see themselves in history and know that they're not alone and that they're not the first person to feel like this and to feel confused in their identity. I think especially being Latina, there's a lot of things that tell you that they're very two opposing identities, being queer and being Latina, and that it doesn't work and that it is opposed to one another. But really being able to see how the community of GLU was created and how everybody was able to have the space to advocate for one another, to be able to provide resources to one another when the other queer spaces weren't providing those resources to our Latina community. And so I think for young people, it's very inspiring to be able to see the folks from GLU and to be able to learn the history so that they know and feel empowered that they can also do the same things and that they're not alone.
I really do think it's still just as important. It's unfortunate that, queer rights and queer culture is still under attack today. And I feel like why it's even more needed to have these voices amplified, and also to kind of like understand that like we aren't like the first in history to be doing like any activism. Like there's a whole bunch of people before us. And for me, it's also highlighting their work and to keep passing it on, which in a way is kind of sad that we're still here. But I feel like it's important to show that there's been so much work that has been done, and it was being done at that time. To think that we're the only ones is kind of wild, but I know there's like a whole history, like hearing y'all's history, like that's so important, because I remember being like a youth trying to find a story similar to mine. And I'm like, okay, maybe it doesn't exist, but it's not true. Like it did exist. I just couldn't find it. I had to wait for it to find me. And I'd rather have youth know it exists now instead of feeling more so isolated in their identities. So I really do think it's important. Like I know the kids that I work with would be like so amazed about it if they knew more about it. And I know people, when I told friends about it, they were just as like shocked. And to me, like, that's crazy that they also didn't know, because a lot of these folks are from LA, have lived in LA their whole lives, like families live there, and they still haven't heard about it. So I think that's why it's really, really relevant for folks to see it now and to continue telling the story. Because I feel like if you don't like tell stories and you don't like keep passing it on, like the story dies like with like people, and it's sad. But that's why archival is so important, and that's why history, remembering history, is just as important.
I also wanted to add one last thing. I think something that from the documentary that we see and that we also want to highlight in the website is that it's funny during the documentary, but it's like we threw really great parties, but just like showing the queer joy that existed back then. And like queer joy is so important, because a lot of the times our stories are just tragic and told in very sad ways. And so highlighting the importance of like, we was fun, y'all had parties, y'all like, it was really great. And so the youth would be able to see it's also fun to be able to do this within the activism as well, I think is very important.
Yeah, they were. So this is Lydia. When Maria and Elias will this archive be made available?
It's actually available now. If you go on Google and you look up GLLUarchive.com, you'll be able to find us. It's still a work in progress. As me and Elias were talking, we're still gathering information, trying to add context to all the photos, but you can find some GLU members, you can find some photos, some information about GLU. And so the website is live now, and there's also a space for folks who were in GLU to add their own submission so that we are still continuing to add history as the time goes on. Elias, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, and it's a work in progress, but it is available. So tune in every now and then. You'll see more and more stuff go on. We also have an Instagram, which is just called GLU Archive as well. It's still getting off the ground, but I'm hoping it can start to get some traction and bring some folks to the website as well.
Wonderful. This is Mario again. I remember a phrase, out of the closets and into the streets, out of the bars and into the streets. Now we're taking this new digital space to activate people to be in this space of sharing information and sharing history. What are people, can you maybe add some more information on what people will find on the website?
Some of the things that are available right now is some of the GLU member bios. So we have photos, we have some of their bios, we have the information about GLU in general and what GLU was like. And we also have a few photos on our homepage. There's carousel photos that Elias made of different marches and different parties that GLU had. And so you'll be able to see some of the photos. And in addition, what we're going to be adding in the future is the different cohorts that GLU had. So like Lesbianas Unidas, Radio GLU, but we're going to have board members, so knowing who's in the board each year. We're going to have all the different pamphlets and flyers, and so it'll be really a really great well of all of the GLU content that was featured in the movie and the documentary and more.
Was really drawn to a lot of the archival stuff because I love like printed images from like 30, 40 years ago. Like a lot of the flyers y'all made, like I'm trying to upload them and have them like have the text read so you can like read what it says. But that's a lot what I do want on there, like the actual media, flyers, any pamphlets at the time, and also a lot of the pictures that are depicting like that queer joy, and folks just like enjoying each other. So I'm hoping to put that on there as well. And I think, yeah, having more photos from Radio GLU as well would be really incredible.
It sounds like you're definitely doing your homework. And by the way, do you have a background in researching? Is this something that you're just learning?
I think for speaking for myself, I don't have a background on researching, but I have like a really passion for sharing. Like I'm a big history nerd in general. Like I love history related stuff. So I feel like that dives deep into that. And this feels really personal to me. So I feel like I really want to push that out there. But I've managed like social media accounts in like other jobs. So I think that is kind of like what has helped a lot with this. And I'm a zillennial as well, so it comes naturally.
I also wanted to ask, are you in need of resources? It sounds like it's just two of you. How can people help? How can they connect with you?
I think one of the most important things is if you are sending a photo, just give us context if you can, as much as you can. So the year, where it was located, who's in the photo, and also if you have any ideas for things that you would want to see either on the website or Instagram page, feel free to contact us. There's a contact page on the website, and then on Instagram, you can just DM us as well. Elias, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's great too. And we could also use like some funding. I feel like that gets a lot of things off the ground. That would, because I feel like I think Maria and I have talked about it too. And I think Lydia was there talking about like how to create funding and also maybe creating some memorabilia related things from GLU. Like I know I personally really wanted like an Unidad like poster or like like a copy of it like hanging somewhere, and I feel like I wouldn't be alone with that. So something related to that. But yeah, funding is really important. We don't have anything set up at the moment, but I think contacting Maria or me related to that would be helpful.
We want to thank Maria Garcia and Elias Naranjo for joining us today and talking about the website for the Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos archives, which you can find at GLLUarchive.com.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It was an honor to be here.
Thanks for listening to us. This has been a segment of Radio QGLU. Today's hosts were Lydia Otero, Mario Novoa, and myself, Rita Gonzalez. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what you think of the Out Agenda and Radio QGLU. Like us on our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, or email us at theoutagenda@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful week. And remember that being out is the first step to being equal. Now stay tuned for This Way Out.